Ilara was nothing, and she knew it. In the Blood Moon Pack, nestled in the frozen heart of the Northern Territories, power was everything. As an Omega, she was the lowest of the low, a creature of rags and shadows, her existence defined by the grime under her fingernails and the gnawing ache in her belly. Her life was a litany of menial tasks and casual cruelties, a cycle of suffering under the iron-fisted rule of Alpha Valerius, a man whose ambition was as cold and sharp as the winter winds. She was promised to him, not as a mate, but as a political pawn, a bride to be broken and discarded. But Ilara harbored a secret, a terrifying and divine truth that she chained deep within her soul. She was not wolfless, as everyone believed. She was the last lunar wolf, a direct descendant of the moon goddess, her true form a creature of impossible power and starlight. To reveal it meant death, so she endured, freezing in the metaphorical snow of her own life until the apocalyptic arrival of the one being in the world who could shatter her chains. Kaelin, the Alpha King, a haunted and lethal ruler searching for a mate he believed he would never find. When he found her, a despised Omega promised to his enemy, he did not see a pawn. He saw his queen, and he chose to unleash the full force of his kingdom to protect her. The cold was a living thing. It seeped through the threadbare wool of her dress, through the cracks in the worn leather of her boots, and settled deep into her bones. Ilara knelt on the flagstones of the great hall, the rough stone biting into her knees. Her breath plumed in the frigid air, a ghost of the life still flickering within her. Her fingers, raw and red, clutched a stiff brush. She scrubbed at a stain that wasn't there, her movements mechanical, born of years of practice. To stop was to invite attention, and attention was pain. Here, in the heart of the Blood Moon Pack's territory, invisibility was her only shield. She was an Omega. Worse than an Omega, she was considered wolfless, a disgrace. The Pack treated her as something less than dirt, a necessary evil to perform the tasks no one else would deign to touch. Scrubbing floors, hauling firewood, tending to the slops. This was her world. A pair of immaculate leather boots stopped just beside her head. Ilara didn't need to look up. The scent of cloying, artificial flowers and smug superiority filled the air. Lyra. Still pretending to be useful, filth? The voice was like honey laced with crushed glass. Lyra was the daughter of Alpha Valerius's Beta, beautiful, cruel, and fiercely jealous of any female who drew even a passing glance from their Alpha. Ilara said nothing. She kept her eyes fixed on the stone, scrubbing harder. A response would only prolong the torment. Lyra nudged Ilara's shoulder with the toe of her boot. It wasn't a hard kick, not yet. It was a gesture of ownership, of contempt. Alpha Valerius will be home soon. He expects the hall to be perfect for his announcement. Ilara's stomach clenched. Alpha Valerius, her intended. The thought was a shard of ice in her gut. He was a brutal, ambitious alpha who had clawed his way to power. He saw her not as a person, but as a stepping stone, a connection to a forgotten bloodline he believed held some minor political advantage. He had claimed her as his future bride, a proclamation that sealed her fate as his personal property. "Did you hear me, Wolfless?" Lyra's voice sharpened. "He has important news. News that will finally elevate this pack to its rightful place." Ilara gave a short, jerky nod, her hair falling across her face to hide the flicker of defiance in her eyes. She hated them. She hated the cold, the hunger, the endless degradation. But most of all, she hated the lie she was forced to live. Deep inside her, something stirred, a vast, silent power, coiled like a serpent made of moonlight. It was her wolf, her secret, her curse. "Patience, little one," a voice whispered in her mind. It was not a voice of thought, but of ancient starlight and cosmic certainty. It was Selene, her wolf, the lunar wolf. Ilara's hands trembled. She was not wolfless. She was the opposite. She was the vessel for a power so immense, so legendary, that its existence had faded into myth. The direct descendants of the moon goddess herself were said to carry a lunar wolf, a being not of flesh and blood, but of pure celestial energy. A wolf that could command the tides, mend the earth, and burn with the cold fire of a distant star. If Valerius or any other alpha ever discovered what she was, they wouldn't worship her. They would vivisect her. They would try to cage her power, to weaponize it, and when they failed, they would destroy her utterly to prevent anyone else from possessing it. So she hid. She suppressed Selene, binding the celestial hurricane inside a fragile glass jar of a body, projecting the aura of a weak, submissive Omega. Lyra finally grew bored and stalked away, her laughter echoing in the cavernous hall. Alara allowed herself a single, shaky breath. The pressure in her chest eased, the coiled power of Selene receding back into the quiet depths of her soul. She finished her work as the weak afternoon sun began to fade, retreating to the only place that was hers, a dilapidated shack behind the kitchens, little more than a pile of rotting wood and drafty walls. It offered no warmth, but it offered solitude. As she huddled under a thin, scratchy blanket, chewing on a stale crust of bread she had managed to pilfer, the pack horn blew. It was a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the ground. It was the signal. Alpha Valerius had returned. A short while later, a grim-faced warrior appeared at her door. "The Alpha summons you, all of you, to the Great Hall, now." He spat the words, his gaze sweeping over her with undisguised disgust. Fear, cold and familiar, wrapped around Alara's heart. A summons for all meant a pack-wide announcement. She could not hide. She could not be invisible. She would have to stand there, among the proud and the powerful, and endure their scorn. She pulled her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders and followed the warrior, her head bowed. The great hall was already packed, the air thick with the scent of dozens of werewolves, a heady mix of pine, earth, and aggression. The heat from their bodies was a stark contrast to the perpetual chill of her own existence. Alpha Valerius stood on the raised dais, a predator in his prime. He was handsome in a sharp, cruel way, his eyes holding a calculating glint. He surveyed his pack, a sneer of satisfaction on his face. Lyra stood near him, beaming with possessive pride. "My pack!" Valerius's voice boomed, silencing the low murmur of the crowd. "I bring news, news that will change our fortunes forever." He paused for dramatic effect, his gaze sweeping the room. For centuries, the great packs have languished, ruled by a distant and complacent king. An alpha king who has failed to secure our borders, who has allowed rogues to fester in the dark woods. But that is about to change. A wave of unease rippled through the hall. To speak ill of the alpha king was treason. "The king comes north," Valerius declared. "King Kalin, the shadow of the throne, will be here within the week. He has declared a great hunt, a tradition our pack will host. It is a test, an inspection, and we will not be found wanting." Alara's blood ran cold. The Alpha King, here. Kalin was a figure of terrifying legend, the Alpha of Alphas. He was said to be ancient, impossibly powerful, his wolf a thing of shadow and fury. He had inherited a fractured kingdom and had spent the last century consolidating his power with ruthless efficiency. They said he was haunted, his heart frozen over after the loss of his family centuries ago, that he moved through the world like a storm front, cold and unstoppable, searching for the mate fated to him by the moon goddess, a mate he had long given up on finding, a pack-wide event, a mandatory gathering. There would be no hiding. He would see her. An alpha of his power would feel the lie of her omega status. He would sense the leviathan she kept chained within. "He will not see," Selena's voice soothed, but for the first time it held a tremor of uncertainty. "The bindings will hold." Ilara wasn't so sure. She felt a tremor of a different kind, a deep primal dread that had nothing to do with Valerius or her pack. It was the terror of a mouse realizing a hawk was circling overhead. Valerius's gaze found her in the crowd. A cruel smile touched his lips. This is our chance to show the king the strength of the Blood Moon Pack. Our discipline. Our purity. We will present ourselves as a united front. And I will present my bride. 100 pairs of eyes turned to her. Scorn, pity, disgust. Ilara shrank under the weight of their collective gaze, feeling smaller and more fragile than ever. The glass jar was cracking. The hurricane inside was waking up. The week passed in a blur of frantic preparation and mounting dread for Ilara. The pack was in a frenzy, cleaning, training, sharpening weapons. For them, it was a chance to impress. For Ilara, it was a countdown to exposure. The day of the king's arrival dawned clear and brutally cold. A layer of fresh snow blanketed the world, muffling all sound. The entire pack was assembled in the main courtyard, ranked by status. Ilara was at the very back, behind the other Omegas, partially hidden by a stack of firewood. It was the best she could do. A hush fell over the courtyard. A scent hit the air first. It was unlike anything Ilara had ever known. It smelled of ancient, snow-dusted forests, of crackling ozone before a lightning strike, and of a profound, soul-deep loneliness. It was a scent of absolute power. He appeared at the edge of the forest, a lone figure at first, then flanked by two enormous warriors. The Alpha King. Kalen was even more intimidating than the legend suggested. He was impossibly tall, well over 6.5 feet, built with the harsh, uncompromising lines of a mountain predator. He wore black leather and furs that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was a mask of cold, chiseled granite, all harsh angles and brutal beauty. But it was his eyes that held the true terror. They were a startling, luminous violet, glowing with an inner light that spoke of immense, barely contained power. They were the eyes of a being who had seen empires fall. His wolf, she could feel it even from here, was an apocalyptic force, a gravity well of sheer dominance that pulled at the very essence of every werewolf present. Pack members, even Valerius, instinctively lowered their heads, their own wolves whining in submission. He is strong, Celine murmured in her mind, a note of something like awe in her tone. Kalen's violet eyes swept over the assembled pack, cold and dismissive. He was not here for pleasantries. His gaze was a physical weight, and Ilara prayed it would pass over her, that her insignificance would be her shield. Alpha Valerius stepped forward, forcing a confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. Alpha King Kalen, it is an honor to welcome you to the Blood Moon Pack. We are at your command. Kalen's gaze fell upon him, and Valerius visibly flinched. The king said nothing. He simply held the Alpha's gaze until Valerius's bravado crumbled and he dropped his eyes, his neck bared in a gesture of complete submission. With a flick of his wrist, Kalen dismissed him, his attention already moving on. His loyal beta, a scarred and formidable warrior named Fenris, stepped forward to handle the formalities. The king himself seemed restless, his gaze scanning the crowd with a strange, hungry intensity. He was searching for his mate. The realization struck Ilara with the force of a physical blow. He was still looking. Later that evening, a grand feast was held in the Great Hall. Ilara, along with the other Omegas, was tasked with serving. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the heavy platters of roasted meat. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run, to flee into the woods and never look back. Stay calm, Selene urged. Be small, be nothing. Ilara moved through the throng of boisterous warriors, her eyes downcast. She refilled goblets, cleared away bones, her movements swift and silent. She managed to avoid the high table where the king sat, a dark, brooding presence beside a fawning Valerius. But her luck ran out. Lyra, seated near the dais, deliberately stuck out her foot as Alara passed, with a heavy tray of wine-filled flagons. Alara stumbled, the tray tilting precariously. With a desperate lurch, she managed to save most of it, but a single flagon tumbled off, crashing to the stone floor right at the foot of the king's throne-like chair. Wine, dark as blood, splattered across the floor and onto the toe of Kaelin's black leather boot. The hall went dead silent. Every sound, every breath, ceased. Alara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had just assaulted the Alpha King. Her life was over. "You clumsy, wolfless bitch!" Valerius snarled, rising from his seat, his face purple with rage. "I will have your hide for this." Alara flinched, bracing for the blow, but it never came. A low growl, deeper and more menacing than anything she had ever heard, rumbled from the king's chest. It was not a sound of anger. It was a sound of pure, possessive warning. It shook the very stones of the hall. Valerius froze, his hand half raised. Slowly, Alara dared to lift her head, and her eyes met his. The world stopped. The instant her terrified gaze locked with those luminous violet depths, everything else fell away. The noise, the fear, the cold. It all vanished, replaced by an apocalyptic jolt that arced between them. It was a lightning strike to her very soul. A scent flooded her senses, overwhelming and intoxicating. Ancient forests, ozone, and a deep, aching loneliness that called to the very core of her being. It was him. Her mind, her body, her soul screamed a single, terrifying word. Mate. At the same time, she felt his shock. She saw the surprise flash in those violet eyes, the mask of cold indifference shattering like glass. His wolf, the shadow beast of legend, roared to the surface. She didn't hear it with her ears, but she felt it in her bones, a psychic bellow that shook the foundations of her world. Mine. The word was not a thought. It was a brand, seared onto her soul. It was a claim, absolute and undeniable. Panic, pure and feral, clawed its way up her throat. This couldn't be happening. Not him. The Alpha King. The one being in the world powerful enough to see through her deception. He would know what she was. He would see the celestial fire she hid, and he would take it. Her survival instincts took over. Before he could move, before he could speak, Alara scrambled backward, her body acting without conscious thought. She turned and fled. She ignored the shouts of Valerius, the gasp of the crowd. She ran from the hall, out into the biting cold of the night, driven by a terror more profound than any she had ever known. She had to get away. She had to hide. She didn't get far. She ran for the cover of the woods, her bare feet stumbling over the snow-covered ground. The magnetic pull of the mate bond was a physical thing, a giant invisible hand trying to drag her back toward the hall. It was agony to fight it. Behind her, she heard a roar of pure, frustrated fury that was not entirely human. It was the king. He was coming for her. She dove behind a snow-laden pine, her chest heaving, her mind a whirlwind of terror and a strange, traitorous longing. "He is our mate," Selene whispered, her voice filled with a wonder and certainty that terrified Alara. "The moon goddess has blessed us. He will kill us," Alara whispered back, her teeth chattering from cold and fear. "He will see you." The hunt for her began immediately. Kaelin's warriors, led by his beta Fenris, spread out, their movements efficient and lethal. But Kaelin did not send them after her directly. He was hunting her himself. She could feel him, a blazing inferno of power and possession moving through the trees, his senses locked onto her scent, the unique fragrance of winter jasmine and starlight that had just upended his entire world. For centuries, Kaelin had been a king of ice and shadow. His heart, frozen by loss, had known no warmth. The mate bond was a myth to him, a fairy tale for lesser wolves. He had ruled, he had conquered, he had endured, but he had not lived, until tonight. The scent of her, the sight of her terrified, beautiful face, had shattered his frozen world. His wolf, a beast that had slumbered in silent rage for 1,000 years, was now wide awake and screaming for its other half. He didn't understand how his mate, his queen, could be a terrified little Omega in the clutches of a brute like Valerius, but it didn't matter. She was his. That was the only truth. Elara managed to evade him for a time, her Omega instincts for hiding honed by years of abuse. She doubled back, used streams to mask her scent, and buried herself in a snowdrift, forcing her breathing to slow, her heart to quiet. She wrapped the chains of her will around Selene, forcing the brilliant lunar power back down, smothering it until she was nothing but a cold, frightened girl again. But she knew it was temporary. The great hunt was scheduled for the next day, a mandatory event. There would be nowhere left to run. The morning of the great hunt was tense and gray. Elara had been dragged from her hiding place not by the king, but by Valerius's guards. Valerius was incandescent with rage. Not only had his promised bride embarrassed him in front of the king, but the king himself had forbidden anyone from laying a hand on her. Kaelin had confined her to her shack under his protection, a move that simultaneously saved her life and signed her death warrant with Valerius. Valerius saw her not as the king's mate. The idea was too preposterous, but as some object of the king's fleeting, perverse interest. An interest that had made him a laughingstock. He was determined to reassert his dominance. The hunt was to take place in a vast ancient clearing in the heart of the forest. The pack gathered, their energy a manic, bloodthirsty thrum in the air. King Kaelin and his men stood apart, watching, the king's violet eyes scanning the crowd, searching for her. Elara tried to hide among the other Omegas, but it was no use. Valerius strode into the center of the clearing, his voice dripping with venom. Today, we hunt. We show the king the strength of the Blood Moon Pack, but first, we must purge our weakness. His eyes locked on Elara. A sick feeling of dread washed over her. We have among us a disgrace, he spat, pointing a finger at her. A wolfless creature who has brought shame upon us. She is a blight, an infection that must be cleansed. Lyra and two of Valerius's brutish enforcers moved toward her. Panic seized Elara. She looked toward the king, a silent plea in her eyes. Kaelin tensed, a low growl starting in his chest, and he took a step forward. But Valerius was clever. As is my right as alpha of this territory, he announced loudly, cutting off Kaelin's advance. I claim the ancient right of the alpha's judgment. Before the hunt begins, I will pass sentence on a member of my own pack for crimes against our laws. It was an old, obscure law, but a valid one. It was an alpha's sovereign right within his own territory. For Kaelin to interfere would be to break the very laws he was sworn to uphold. It would be an act of war. Fenris put a restraining hand on his king's arm, his expression grim. Kaelin's eyes blazed with apocalyptic fury, but he was trapped. Lyra and the guards grabbed Elara, their hands like iron bands on her arms. They dragged her from the crowd and threw her into the center of the clearing at Valerius's feet. She landed hard on the frozen, snow-dusted earth. This thing, Valerius said, gesturing to her with contempt, is promised to me. Yet she consorts with others, shaming my name. The lie was blatant, but the pack, whipped into a frenzy, bade their agreement. She is wolfless, useless, and defiant. I declare her forfeit. She will be the prey for this year's great hunt. A savage cheer went up from the Blood Moon Pack. To be hunted was a death sentence. Elara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with terror. This was it. This was how she died. Her gaze flew to Kaelin. He was radiating a killing intent so powerful it felt like the air was turning to glass. He was a caged god of wrath, his hands clenched into fists, his entire body shaking with the effort of holding his wolf back. Lyra leaned down, her face close to Elara's, her smile a vicious slash. I told you your place, filth. Now you'll finally be put in it. The ground. Valerius loomed over her. You have disgraced me for the last time. You are nothing. Less than nothing. He drew back his hand to strike her, to deliver the first blow that would mark her as the prey. It was the point of no return. In that instant, as his hand descended, something inside Alara broke. The years of pain, of hunger, of humiliation, of hiding. It all coalesced into a single point of unbearable pressure. The chains she had wrapped around her soul shattered. "No more!" Selene roared, not a whisper, but a cosmic thunderclap that detonated within her. As Valerius's fist connected with her cheek, it was not a small, fragile girl he struck. It was the vessel of a goddess. The impact, meant to break her, instead, broke her prison. An explosion of pure silver light erupted from her body. It was not a fire. It was a cold, silent detonation of celestial energy. A pillar of blinding moonlight shot into the overcast sky, punching a hole through the clouds. The temperature in the clearing plummeted, and the snow at her feet began to glow with an ethereal luminescence. The entire Blood Moon pack was thrown backward by the sheer force of the shockwave. Valerius was flung through the air like a child's toy, landing in a heap 20 feet away. Lyra screamed, shielding her eyes from the light that felt like it was peeling her soul apart. Alara rose to her feet, but it was not Alara anymore. She was wreathed in shimmering starlight, her tattered rags transforming into a shifting gown of pure moonlight. Her eyes were no longer the color of a winter sky. They were molten silver, glowing with an ancient, terrifying power. With a cry that was both anguish and ecstasy, she arched her back and shifted. It was not the sound of tearing flesh and cracking bone that the pack knew. It was the sound of stars being born, of nebulae coalescing. Her form dissolved into a swirling vortex of light and shadow, then reformed. Where the small Omega girl had stood, there was now a creature of breathtaking, terrifying myth. A wolf. But a wolf like no other. It was colossal, larger than any 3 wolves combined, its body not made of fur, but of solidified moonlight, shimmering and semi-translucent. Stars glittered within its form, and its tail was a flowing comet of silver energy. Its eyes were twin moons, glowing with an intelligence that was both primal and divine. The lunar wolf. The legend was real. Absolute, terrified silence fell over the clearing. The only sound was the faint celestial chiming that seemed to emanate from the great wolf's body. The wolves of the Blood Moon pack were frozen, their minds unable to process what they were seeing. This was not a wolf. This was a god. Valerius stared, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. Lyra had fallen to her knees, trembling, her smug cruelty vaporized by sheer holy terror. Across the clearing, Kalen watched, his own shock giving way to something else. Awe, understanding, and a possessive pride so immense it bordered on madness. This was his mate. Not an Omega, not a victim. A queen, a goddess. The other half of his soul hidden in plain sight. His wolf, the shadow beast, surged forward, not with rage at her, but for her. He saw the lingering terror in her lunar eyes, the confusion warring with the instinct. He knew what he had to do. With a roar that cracked the very sky, Kalen shifted. His own transformation was a brutal, violent explosion of shadow and rage. Where the king had stood, a monstrous wolf of pure darkness now crouched, its body seeming to devour the light, its violet eyes burning like dying stars. He was the Shadow King, the perfect faded counterpoint to her light. The pack whimpered in terror as the 2 legendary beings faced each other across the clearing. The great black wolf took a step forward, then another. He did not approach her as a challenger. He approached as a supplicant. He walked until he stood before the shimmering lunar wolf, his sheer size and darkness a stark contrast to her celestial light. He lowered his massive head, the gesture one of utter reverence. Then, before the eyes of the stunned pack, before his own warriors, Kalen, the Alpha King, the shadow of the throne, the most powerful werewolf in the world, did the unthinkable. He knelt. He bent his forelegs and lowered his body to the ground, baring his throat to her in the ultimate gesture of submission. It was not the submission of a defeated foe. It was the fealty of a king to his queen. The devotion of a mate to his other half. The message was absolute, undeniable. She was not to be hunted. She was to be worshipped. The power thrumming through Alara was terrifying. It was like trying to hold the ocean in a teacup. Selene's consciousness was intertwined with her own, showing her the world through senses she had never known. She could feel the life force in the trees, the ley lines of magic in the earth, the gravitational pull of the distant moons. And she could feel him. Kalen. His submission was a balm on her frayed nerves, a silent vow that resonated deep in her soul. He was not her enemy. He was her shield. With an effort of will that felt like wrestling a star, Alara forced the shift to reverse. The celestial light swirled and condensed, the colossal wolf form dissolving back into the shape of the girl. She stood there, swaying, the gown of moonlight fading back into her tattered rags, her eyes slowly returning to their normal color, though now they held a silver sheen that had not been there before. Kalen shifted back as well, the shadows receding to reveal the man. He rose to his full, intimidating height, but his expression was no longer cold. His violet eyes were blazing with a fierce, protective fire. He strode to her side, ignoring the gasping crowd, and wrapped his own luxurious fur cloak around her trembling shoulders. It was warm and smelled of him, of forest and lightning. "It's all right," he murmured, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. "I have you." He turned to face the shell-shocked Blood Moon pack. His gaze fell on Valerius, who was still struggling to his feet, his face a mess of blood and snow. The king's expression turned lethal. "Valerius." Kalen's voice was deceptively calm, but it held the promise of apocalyptic violence. "You laid a hand on my mate. You sentenced my queen to be hunted like an animal." The words, "my mate" and "my queen," struck the pack like a physical blow. A collective gasp went through the crowd. I didn't know," Valerius stammered, his arrogance shattered, replaced by crawling, desperate fear. "She was an Omega, wolfless, a nobody." "She was hiding from monsters like you," Kalen snarled, his control snapping. "And your reign of terror is over." He flicked his gaze to Lyra, who was trying to crawl away. "Both of you." "Fenris," the king commanded without looking at his beta. "My king." Fenris was instantly at his side. "Take them. And any who stood with them. Put them in chains. They will face my judgment. Move." The single word was an alpha command of such immense power that Lyra and Valerius's enforcers collapsed, their bodies unable to defy it. Kalen's warriors moved in, efficient and merciless, dragging the screaming, protesting antagonists away. Kalen turned his attention back to Alara. He gently cupped her face, his large, calloused thumb stroking her cheek where Valerius had struck her. A faint silver light glowed from her skin where he touched her, the bruise already fading under the influence of her latent lunar power. "I am taking you with me," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. "You will never be cold or hungry or afraid again. I swear it on my life." She could only nod, overwhelmed by the speed of it all, from Omega to Queen. From victim to the mate of the most powerful being she had ever met, she looked into his violet eyes and saw not a tyrant or a conqueror, but a man who had been just as lost as she was, a man who had finally found his way home. He swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing and carried her from the clearing, away from the terrified stares of her former pack. He didn't take her to her hovel. He took her directly to the royal pavilion that had been set up for him, a massive tent of black silk and fur that was larger and more luxurious than Valerius's entire great hall. Inside, A fire blazed in a brazier, and thick furs covered every surface. It was warmer than anywhere Alara had ever been. Kaelin gently set her down on a pile of soft pelts before the fire and knelt in front of her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer now, the lethal edge gone. I don't know what I am," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You are Ilara," he said, his gaze intense, "and you are the last lunar wolf. My fated mate, my queen." He spoke the words with a reverence that made her heart ache. "How did you know?" "There are prophecies," he explained, his voice low and mesmerizing. "Ancient texts that speak of the Shadow King who would unite the packs under a banner of night. But the prophecies all said his reign would be one of sterile, cold order, a kingdom without a heart. Until his queen was found." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. The prophecy spoke of a daughter of the moon, a wolf of starlight hidden in a shell of sorrow. It said she would be the heart of the kingdom, the light to his shadow. It said her coming would herald a new age of balance. He looked at her, his violet eyes filled with a century of loneliness. "I stopped believing in that prophecy a long time ago. I thought it was a child's story. Until I saw you." The mate bond, now that they were close and the danger had passed, was a living current between them. It was a deep, resonant hum that settled in her bones, chasing away the last of the fear and replacing it with a sense of rightness, of belonging. "Why did you hide?" he asked gently. Tears welled in Alara's eyes. "They would have killed me. My parents told me before they died. They said the world was not ready. They helped me bind Selene to project the image of an Omega. It was the only way to survive." Kaelin's jaw tightened, his fury at what she had endured simmering just beneath the surface. "That world is gone. I will build you a new one where you never have to hide again." He ordered food and drink, warm clothes and healing salves. He tended to her himself, his touch surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the scrapes on her arms and feet. He treated her not like a fragile Omega, but like a revered monarch. For the first time in her life, Alara felt safe. She felt seen. The next day, Kaelin convened the tribunal. It was held in the same clearing where she had been sentenced to die. But this time, 2 thrones had been placed on a raised platform. One was of dark, obsidian-like wood, carved with shadows and snarling wolves. The other, hastily constructed but no less magnificent, was of silver birchwood, draped in white furs. Kaelin led her to the white throne. When she hesitated, he simply said, "This is your place, beside me." She sat, the fur soft beneath her. From this vantage point, she looked down on the assembled Blood Moon pack. Their faces were a mixture of awe and terror. They were no longer looking at an Omega. They were looking at a legend. At their queen. Valerius and Lyra were dragged forward in chains, their fine clothes torn and muddied. They were forced to their knees before the thrones. "Alpha Valerius of the Blood Moon pack," Kaelin's voice boomed, devoid of any warmth. "You are charged with high treason against the crown. You have abused your power, terrorized your people, and you raised a hand against your queen." "I didn't know," Valerius repeated, his voice a pathetic whine. "Ignorance is not a defense," Kaelin said coldly. "You built your power on the suffering of the weak. You saw a young, seemingly helpless girl and your first instinct was to crush her. That is your crime. You are unfit to lead. You are unfit to live among wolves." He then turned his gaze to Lyra, who was sobbing uncontrollably. "And you? You took pleasure in the torment of one who had done you no wrong. Your jealousy and cruelty are a poison." Kaelin looked at Alara. His expression softened. "The crimes were against you, my queen. The sentence, therefore, is yours to pass." All eyes turned to her. The pack held its breath. Valerius and Lyra stared up at her, their lives hanging on her word. This was the ultimate power shift. The girl they had tormented now held their fates in her hands. Elara looked down at them. She saw Valerius's sneering face as he sentenced her to be hunted. She saw Lyra's vicious smile as she tripped her. She remembered the cold, the hunger, the endless despair. A part of her, the part that had been forged in that suffering, wanted to see them burn. But as she looked at them, cowering and broken, she felt no satisfaction. Only a vast, weary pity. They were small, pathetic creatures, their power nothing but a hollow shell. Celine's voice was a calm whisper in her mind. Justice is not the same as vengeance, little one. You are a queen now. Be just. Elara took a deep breath, her voice clear and steady when she spoke, ringing with an authority she didn't know she possessed. Your cruelty was born of your own weakness, she said, her words carrying across the silent clearing. You feared anything you could not control or understand. You will have time to contemplate that weakness. She looked at Kaelin. They are not worth the dirt on your boots. Let them not stain this ground with their blood. I sentence them to the black cells, beneath your own castle. Let them live out their days in the darkness they so readily inflicted on others. A murmur of surprise went through the crowd. It was a merciful sentence, yet a terrible one. The black cells were a legendary prison from which no one ever escaped, a place of absolute sensory deprivation. Kaelin looked at her, a flicker of immense pride in his eyes. He had expected a call for death. She had shown wisdom and restraint. She had shown she was a true queen. As the queen commands, so it shall be, he declared. Take them away. As Valerius and Lyra were dragged off, their wails of despair echoing through the forest, Kaelin stood and addressed the remaining Blood Moon pack. Your alpha has been stripped of his title and his life. Your pack is broken. From this day forward, you will swear fealty not to a local alpha, but directly to the crown, to your king, and to your queen. One by one, the wolves of the Blood Moon pack fell to their knees, bowing their heads not in fear this time, but in genuine, awe-struck allegiance to the celestial being who had risen from their midst. The journey back to the king's capital, the Onyx Citadel, was a stark contrast to Elara's entire life. She traveled in a luxurious carriage, wrapped in warmth and safety, with Kaelin constantly at her side. He was a surprisingly gentle companion, answering her endless questions about the world, about her own powers, and about the kingdom that was now hers to co-rule. The Onyx Citadel was a breathtaking fortress carved from the heart of a black mountain, its towers piercing the clouds. It was a place of immense power and stark beauty. As their procession arrived, thousands of werewolves lined the streets, their heads bowed as the king and his newfound queen passed. Whispers of the lunar wolf had spread like wildfire. Elara was given a suite of rooms that overlooked the entire kingdom. They were decorated in silvers and whites, a stark contrast to the dark stone of the castle, a space of light carved out of the shadow. For the first time, she had a home. But not everyone in the capital was pleased with her arrival. Lord Vorlag was one of the oldest and most influential members of the king's council. He was a wolf of ancient lineage and even more ancient ambition. For decades, he had been the second most powerful man in the kingdom, his influence growing in the vacuum of the king's emotional absence. The prophecy of a lunar queen was, to him, a threat to his carefully constructed empire of influence. He watched the adoration of the people for their new queen with a sour-curdled expression. He saw the way Kaelin, a king who had been cold for a century, had thawed in her presence. His power was slipping away, and he would not allow it. A few weeks after their arrival, Kaelin was called away to deal with an urgent border dispute, a remnant of the chaos Valerius had allowed to fester. He was reluctant to leave her, his protective instincts on a knife's edge. I will be gone only 2 days, he promised, holding her hands in his. Fenris will remain. My royal guard will not leave your side. You will be safe. I am not the same girl you found in the snow, Kaelin. she reminded him softly, a small smile on her face. Celine was a constant, comforting presence within her now, her power a warm sea rather than a chained hurricane. I can protect myself. His eyes darkened with possessive heat. I know, but allow me to protect you anyway. He kissed her. A deep, promising kiss that spoke of a future she was only just beginning to believe in. His absence felt like a missing limb. The mate bond was a constant, thrumming connection, and with him gone, it was a dull ache. That night, Alara stood on the balcony of her chambers, looking out at the twin moons that graced the night sky. A faint sound from inside her rooms broke her reverie. A footstep that was too soft, too stealthy. She turned, her senses on high alert. Celine was instantly awake within her, a low growl echoing in her mind. The shadows in the corner of her room seemed to deepen, to coalesce. 3 figures emerged, clad in black from head to toe, their faces masked. They moved with a silent, unnatural grace. Assassins. And with them was Lord Vorlag, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. "My Lady Alara," he said, his voice a silky poison. "Forgive the intrusion, but your reign, I'm afraid, must come to a premature end." The royal guards stationed outside her door had made no sound. They were either dead or neutralized. Fear tried to grip her, the old familiar fear of a victim. But she shoved it down. She was not a victim anymore. "Vorlag," she said, her voice steady. "You are a traitor." "I am a patriot," he corrected smoothly. "The kingdom needs a strong, singular ruler, not a king distracted by a fairy tale. He was better when he was cold, when he listened to me." One of the assassins lunged, moving with impossible speed, but Alara was no longer a slow, human girl. She sidestepped the attack, her movements fluid and graceful. "You are a fool if you think you can harm me," she said, her eyes beginning to glow with a soft silver light. Vorlag chuckled. "Oh, I know what you are, Your Highness. I have studied the old magics, and I came prepared." He produced a dagger from his coat. It was forged of a twisted black metal that seemed to drink the light from the room. It radiated a feeling of utter wrongness. Shadow-forged steel, anathema to celestial beings. This will not just kill you. It will unmake your very soul. He signaled to his assassins. "Kill her." 2 of them engaged her at once, their movements a blur. They were preternaturally fast, their blades weaving a web of death. Alara dodged and weaved, her newfound grace and Celine's precognitive instincts keeping her just out of reach. But it was a desperate dance. She was unarmed and untrained in combat. As she dodged a blade aimed at her heart, the other assassin's partner swung low, catching her leg. The blade, though not shadow-forged, bit deep. Pain, sharp and hot, shot up her leg. She cried out and stumbled. Vorlag smiled, raising the shadow-forged dagger. "A pity. You were almost beautiful." Just as he lunged, the doors to her chamber exploded inward, blasted off their hinges by a wave of pure kinetic force. Kalen stood in the doorway, his eyes not violet but burning pits of black fire. He had felt her pain through the mate bond, a spike of agony and terror that had sent him racing back to the citadel at a speed that defied nature. He had returned in 1 hour, not 2 days. "Vorlag!" His roar was the sound of an avalanche, a promise of death. The 2 assassins turned to face the king, a fatal mistake. Kalen moved, a blur of shadow and fury. He dispatched them in 2 heartbeats, their lives ending in brutal, final motions of his claws. But the distraction was what Vorlag had counted on. As Kalen dealt with the assassins, Vorlag turned his attention back to the wounded Alara, the shadow-forged dagger raised for the final, soul-destroying blow. He would not reach her. Alara, clutching her bleeding leg, looked up at the descending dagger, at the face of the man who would unmake her. And she felt no fear, only rage, a cold, celestial rage. Enough. She lifted her hand, not in defense, but in command. She didn't consciously summon the power. It answered the call of her will, her need to protect herself and her mate. A wave of pure, incandescent moonlight erupted from her palm. It was not a blast of force, but a wave of absolute order, of celestial law. It struck Vorlog mid-lunge. He froze, paralyzed, his body locked in place as if encased in crystal. The wave of light washed over the shadow-forged dagger. The unholy weapon shrieked, a high, thin sound like tearing reality, and then shattered into 1,000 pieces of black dust. Kaelin turned just in time to see Vorlog, helpless and paralyzed, fall to the floor. He looked at the dust that had been the dagger, then at Alara, who was cradling her hand, her eyes wide with shock at what she had just done. He rushed to her side, his fury instantly replaced by frantic concern. He examined her leg, his touch gentle. "The power of the moon is already mending it," he murmured, seeing the skin slowly knitting itself back together. He then looked up at her, his eyes full of awe. "You saved yourself." I didn't know I could do that," she whispered. He smiled, a true, breathtaking smile. "We are learning about your power together, my love." He stood and walked over to the paralyzed form of Lord Vorlag. The moonlight holding him was already fading. Feeling began to return to his limbs. He looked up at Kaelin with terrified eyes. "My king." Kaelin's expression was terrifyingly blank. "You conspired against my crown. You tried to murder my queen. There is only one sentence for such treason." He did not need to use his claws. He simply placed a hand on Vorlog's chest. Shadows poured from his palm, enveloping the traitor. Vorlog screamed, a sound that was abruptly cut off as the shadows consumed him, leaving nothing behind but a faint wisp of black smoke and the lingering scent of ozone. The final threat was neutralized. Kaelin returned to Alara's side, pulling her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She buried her face in his shoulder, finally letting the tremors of reaction shake her. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "No one will ever harm you again. I will burn the world to ash before I let anyone lay a hand on you." She looked up at him, her silver-flecked eyes meeting his violet ones. "I know," she said. And for the first time, she believed it with every fiber of her being. 6 months passed. Winter gave way to a vibrant spring, and the kingdom thrived under the dual reign of its Shadow King and Lunar Queen. The balance Kaelin had maintained through fear was now tempered by the hope and light Alara brought. She was not just a consort. She was a ruler in her own right, her wisdom and compassion earning her the adoration of their people. Alara stood on the great balcony of the Onyx Citadel, the same one where she had been attacked. The evening breeze was gentle, carrying the scent of blooming moon petal flowers from the gardens she had planted herself. She wore a gown of silver silk that shimmered like her own internal light, a simple silver circlet on her brow. She was no longer a frightened girl hiding in the snow. She was a queen, confident and serene, at peace with the immense power that now flowed through her as easily as her own breath. The ache of the mate bond was a constant, pleasant warmth, a tether that connected her to Kaelin no matter where he was in the castle. She felt him approach now, his familiar, powerful presence a comfort to her soul. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his scent of forest and night enveloping her. "What is my queen contemplating so seriously?" he murmured, his lips brushing her temple. She smiled, leaning her head back against him. "I was just remembering a girl in rags, scrubbing a floor she was afraid to look up from." Kaelin's arms tightened around her. That girl had the heart of a queen even then. She was just waiting for the world to be worthy of her. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the twin moons, one silver, one pale blue, began their ascent into the twilight sky. "I was so afraid of you that first night," she confessed softly. "I thought you were a monster come to devour me." "I was a monster," he corrected, his voice a low rumble. A king of shadows and dust. You, my love, are the one who taught me to live again. You are the light that gave my shadows meaning. She turned in his arms to face him, placing her hands on his chest. She looked up into his handsome, chiseled face, those violet eyes that had once held such coldness now filled with an endless, fierce devotion for her. And you, she said, her voice filled with a love that felt as vast as the cosmos, are the one who saw a queen when all I saw was a slave. You gave me the freedom to become who I was always meant to be. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of frantic discovery or desperate relief, but one of deep, abiding love and partnership. It was a kiss that sealed their past, their present, and their infinite future. It was the kiss of a king and queen, shadow and light, forever bound together. Her power was never a curse, she realized. It was a promise, a diamond forged under the immense pressure of suffering, waiting for the right hands to unearth it and let it catch the light. And as they stood on the balcony, united under the light of the twin moons, the kingdom below them safe and at peace, Ilara knew she was finally, truly home. Love, she had learned, was the most powerful magic of all. And that's our story for today. The incredible journey of Ilara from a terrified, abused Omega to the powerful Lunar Queen, and the Alpha King who found his heart and his destiny in the last person he ever expected. A true diamond, forged in the harshest of winters, finally allowed to shine in all her glory. If you enjoyed watching Ilara rise up and claim her power, and Kalen getting his happily ever after, do me a huge favor and destroy that like button. Every like helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories, just like this one. And of course, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and have rung that notification bell so you don't miss a single upload. We have new stories coming all the time, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Now for today's question, what sentence do you think Valerius and Lyra deserved? Should Ilara have been more vengeful, or was her act of mercy the ultimate power move? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading what you all think. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.